I didn't find the tape so much as the tape found me. I was at a dingy thrift store on the edge of town, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights flicker like they're running on ghost power, and every aisle smells faintly of wet carpet and expired milk. There was a cardboard box shoved under a leaning shelf of cookbooks, half hidden behind a busted porcelain clown lamp. Inside were unmarked cassettes and warped VHS covers, The Land Before Time taped over with football games, a warped Barney tape, a home video labeled Steven's Wedding, Do Not Watch. Buried at the bottom was a plain black VHS with The Simpsons scrawled in shaky Sharpie, the ink bleeding like it had been written in a panic. "Just take it," she whispered. Her pupils were too wide, she wouldn't meet my eyes. At home I dug my old VCR out of the closet, the one that smells like hot dust when it runs. I slid in the tape. There was no familiar Cloud intro, no Danny Elfman theme, no couch gag. Instead, the opening frame was The Simpsons, living room empty. The couch sat there for 30 silent seconds. No music. Just the faint, muffled sound of chewing. Wet, rhythmic chewing, paired with occasional soft tearing noises, like Velcro being peeled slowly. Then the camera snapped to the kitchen. Homer sat hunched at the table. His shirt was gone, and his skin was peeling away from his arms in thick, curling strips. He was using a butter knife, not sawing, just sliding it under the skin and lifting it off, like someone peeling an orange. No blood, no pain. Just these slow, deliberate motions, his face completely calm. Every time he removed a section, he'd toss it into a mixing bowl. When he finally reached his head, he pulled the skin forward over his face like a mask, exposing the grinning white skull beneath. His jawbone clacked slightly as he muttered, "Finally, free." Now he was a complete skeleton, still in his tidy whities. His hollow eye sockets seemed to pulse faintly, like there was something alive in them. Marge walked in from the left of the frame. She glanced at him, then at the skin bowl, then went right back to scrolling on a massive beige CRT monitor that had somehow appeared on the kitchen counter. She was browsing something that looked like a late 90s GeoCities website, giant blue text reading Diaper Fan Central and top 100 diaper reviews of the year. She whispered things like extra absorbent and elastic side tabs under her breath. Homer rattled his bones in excitement. "Time to make my bones nuts." He began grinding his discarded skin into a pale, fibrous flour, using a manual meat grinder. The sound was gritty and damp at the same time. He mixed it with eggs, sugar, and something from a jar labeled Calcium Boost in Comic Sans. His humming was the Simpsons theme, but slowed and warped, like it was being played backwards underwater. Abrupt cut. Bart was outside the Quickia Mart, holding hands with an orangutan. They were sharing a giant squishy with 2 straws. The orangutan wore a little red sundress. Bart was in a tuxedo t-shirt. Behind the counter was Hans Mulliman, his eyes wide, his voice shaky. That ain't right at all." The orangutan turned to look directly at him. She blew him a kiss. Mulliman collapsed behind the counter in slow motion, like a tree falling. The screen flickered, then we were suddenly back in the Simpson house. Maggie was in her crib. A lit joint dangled from her mouth, smoke curling toward the mobile above her head. She took a deep drag, and the screen zoomed slowly into her face. Her pupils dilated until there was almost no white left, just 2 black voids reflecting the light. The walls around her warped. The wallpaper stretched and twisted into spirals, the flowers turning into hundreds of tiny eyes blinking in unison. The crib bars elongated like they were melting. Through the window behind her, 2 faces emerged from the darkness of the backyard trees. Richard Nixon and George W. Bush. They weren't in front of the trees. They were inside them, their faces pressed against the bark as if the wood was transparent. Both were smiling too wide, their teeth a shade too sharp. Nixon mouthed something silently. Bush waved in stiff, unnatural motions, like a marionette. Maggie blinked hard. When her eyes opened, they were gone, but the curtains swayed as if touched, and faint cigarette smoke hung in the air. Back in the kitchen, Skeleton Homer was frosting his batch of bones nuts with a thick white glaze. The donuts were wrong. Their holes weren't circles. They were perfect little human-shaped outlines, as if miniature people had been cut from the center. "Eat, my family," he said, sliding the tray toward the table. His voice was louder now, echoing like he was speaking in a tiled bathroom. Bart and the orangutan arrived home, walking in unison. They stood still for a moment, then began spinning together in place, faster and faster, until their outlines blurred. Homer bit into a donut, and Marge, without looking up from her diaper website, collapsed into a pile of Taco Bell menu items. First a Nachos Bel Grande, then a Chalupa, then a lone Crunchwrap Supreme that rolled slowly across the linoleum. The orangutan dissolved into a beefy 5-layer burrito. Bart became a Doritos Locos Taco. The spinning stopped. The last shot was Maggie again, still in her crib. Her pupils were so wide now they reflected the entire room. She stared directly into the camera, unblinking. Behind her, through the window, Nixon and Bush had returned, but now they were closer, their faces filling the glass. They pressed their palms against it, leaving faint greasy smears as they smiled. Maggie was smoking a joint and smiling as Marge cried in the background. Homer, now a complete skeleton, had Bart screaming as his skeleton smiled and strangled him, ending his life. Maggie was being cut in half as though she was a birthday cake, and Marge had committed suicide, with diaper browser tabs on in the background. Hans Moleman came in and began celebrating his birthday, lit up a joint, and revealed he was a real Moleman, as all of the dead Simpsons lay in the background, Hans eating a delicious piece of Maggie with Bone Homer. Mac Reeling walked out and apologizes, but Homer strangles him, and the familiar Simpson theme plays as you hear angry arguing from Dan Castellaneta phoning his agent.